During the fall of my 3rd grade year, it became the fashion to play Star Trek at recess, which was great for me because I loved Star Trek. And even better for me because I was never really that cool kid in grade school. I got to be Captain Kirk. Who doesn't want to be Captain Kirk as a 3rd grade boy? Full of myself, I commanded the ship at recess with all the power I imagined one would be in command. And I named new people to the crew and told who was going to fight aliens and who was going to do this. And one day at recess, a friend of mine brings up her friend who wants to play too and has not been joining with us. And her friend's name was Michelle. And Michelle was that kid in school who was very, very smart. And yet seemed to have a real hard time to fit in. Clothes weren't quite right. Had the unfortunate circumstance of having the baby teeth go out and the adult teeth not coming in and the smile all messed up. Hair in a style very short that no other girl in her class would sport. Awkward, stumbling. And I said, no, you can't play. We don't want any ugly ducklings on the ship. Wow. I am a horrible person. I am a bad minister. I was mean and bullied. That was nasty. For years, that bothered me. Could not let it go. Finally, years later, at an event in town where everybody comes to at the holidays, not having seen her probably since high school, right? I approached her and said, I'm sorry. No problem, we were kids. And yet, still, all these years after that, I will wake up sometimes with the thought of what I said to her that afternoon at recess and hate myself that I can't let go. Lately, in the past few weeks, I have fallen into tirades of enraged anger and incredulity of how anyone could have voted for Donald Trump. In ugly violation of my universalist faith, I went on and on to a friend last week about how useless it is to even talk to these people. It's like arguing the Bible with a fundamentalist. They don't accept science or reason or critical thinking. You can't do anything here. I cited Bonhoeffer. The stupid is a greater enemy of the good than is evil. Her response to me was, your condescension is getting in the way of your understanding. Oh, yeah. Then I got angry at her. And then I got angry at myself. I'm writing a grant proposal to get funding for a project where people learn how to talk to people across their differences. To help people understand and communicate with those people with whom they disagree, with whom they don't even like. I don't believe anyone is vile and inhuman and incapable of being spoken with and spoken to. And I thought, wow, I am not a good minister. I am not a good person. Thank God nobody in the congregation knows I said those things. So those are examples of how I get caught up in the spectrums of shame and guilt that require some self-acceptance, self-understanding, and forgiving of myself. So I am guilty. I called names, I dehumanized, I bullied, I did wrong things. And calling my classmate names and dehumanizing people I might have political disagreements with, those are wrong things. And so I was guilty. And guilt's okay. Guilt is kind of actually good. Guilt means we have a moral compass that we're dealing with, that we realize we did something wrong. But I'm also ashamed. I'm an imposter. I'm really a horrible person who bullies and name calls and acts in mean ways to other people. Sometimes people I haven't even actually met in person. I'm horrible. I'm not okay. What would you think of me if you knew? How can I have this job? I'm always going to not like myself in this way. It'll never go away. It's shame. It squeezes tight. It grasps us and holds us. And like with everyone else, it tells me I am someone wrong. I'm not okay with someone. But forgiving oneself is an exercise in self-acceptance. We cannot forgive others until we forgive ourselves. And we cannot forgive ourselves until we are okay with ourselves. And at the same time, we cannot give ourselves free rein to behave however we wish, because at heart we're good people. Sometimes we're wrong and have to take responsibility for what we've done wrong. So self-acceptance requires us to be truly okay with ourselves as not perfect, not completely wonderful people, not always perfectly good, but good enough. And this is the basic tenet of universalism. Everyone is good enough. Everyone is worthy of dignity and respect and love and acceptance. My classmate Michelle certainly was and is. And even though I said that horrible thing to her so much, I am and you are, we are good enough, even when we've done something wrong. Just because we've done something wrong does not mean we are someone wrong. Because shame is not okay. In my position as a liberal religious minister, I hear a lot of people talk about religious guilt. And when I hear that, the story I'm hearing is not about guilt. It's about shame. What people mean when they say they gave up religious guilt or Catholic guilt or whatever guilt in religion they came from, it's not guilt they're talking about. Because guilt is about doing something wrong. You behaved wrongly, you said something wrongly, you did something you shouldn't have. What they're talking about when they talk about those things is feelings of shame. What they're giving up is being made to feel they are someone wrong because they ate meat on Friday, or didn't go to temple on Sabbath, or happened to be gay. And getting rid of shame is well and good. It's never okay. Shame is not okay. Because shame tells you you are not good enough. So, in order to forgive ourselves and be okay with ourselves, we need to do a little bit of an understanding of how we can meet this balance, how we can meet ourselves in the middle, how we can understand when it's good to hold ourselves to account because we did something wrong. Without staying in that place so long, we continue to beat ourselves up over it and then think we are someone wrong. So, I think humility can help us here. And James Keenan was a person, the guy who wrote the second reading about humility. I studied ethics and moral theology with him when I was in seminary. And I like his approach to humility. Humility is not self-deprecation. Humility is not, oh, little old me, and put everyone else's needs first. Humility, like every other virtue, is the median between two vices. Humility is the median, the middle ground, the middle way, as the Buddhists would say, between self-loathing and self-aggrandizement. There are some things, and there are some times which we should not let ourselves off easy. Some guilt is a good thing. It keeps us honest. It stops us from swinging to the other extreme, lest we start thinking we're so great we never hurt anyone or do anything wrong. And yet, we still bash ourselves over the head more than and long after we deserve to. As much as we let other people off the hook for being who they are, warts and all, we don't allow ourselves the same grace. And maybe practicing a little humility, practicing having that accurate and acceptable view of ourselves with our virtues and our vices, our good and our bad, our warts and all, is a way to accept ourselves into a place we can forgive ourselves. Because I think too often we get stuck sometimes because we've done something wrong that we are someone wrong, whether we're too fat or too tall or too thin or too old or too sick or too ugly or too addicted or too depressed or too manic or too neat or too liberal or too conservative. One of the common defense mechanisms we use to hide this not being okay with ourselves is we overinflate ourselves. Chances are you see somebody who's always self-promoting, they're not okay with themselves. That somehow we're not okay with ourselves if we're not the perfect daughter, son, mother, father, friend, minister, so on. And to cover that up, we brag, we need the spotlight. We need to be told constantly how wonderful we are. That's the false self. We create a self that we feel we have to believe in as being truly us, so that self can be okay, because where we are is not really feeling okay about us. Humility, trying to get an accurate picture of where we are with our strengths and our weaknesses, helps defeat, put away that false self. Humility is that balance, that measured, accurate view of ourselves. It's the virtue that makes self-esteem possible. It makes having a positive self-image, where you really can accept and love yourself, possible. It's the virtue that lets us forgive ourselves and others. It's the virtue that lets us understand we and other people are good enough. Like forgiving others, forgiving ourselves goes through a few stages. I love Bishop Desmond Tutu's 4 steps in the process of forgiveness he used in South Africa after apartheid. Tell the story. Name the hurt. Grant forgiveness repair or release the relationship. To forgive ourselves, we need to tell our story to ourselves, just as it is, not needing to build it up to make ourselves better in the story or worse in the story. When I was in 3rd grade, I was mean and I hurt a classmate's feelings. That's the story. Name what hurts. When we name what hurts in the story, we tend to fall into the grievance story model or problem, where we must hear the story of how we've been hurt over and over. It becomes an idol. It justifies our anger, our rage, our dislike, our disapproval, our not engaging the person or thing that hurt us. It allows us to wallow in our wrongingness. And we tell grievance stories about ourselves. As I've shared with you this morning, I tell a couple about myself all the time. You know, I'm really not so good. I'm not a good person. I'm faking this. What if everybody finds me out? This is my story I tell myself. And I think I'm just trying to get myself off the hook. As if, you know, if I continue to feel bad enough about myself, it will be okay. And it doesn't help. I'm not a monster. I did something bad when I was in 3rd grade. And I have to let the story be the story and accept it for what it is. She said she forgives me. We were kids. I'm the one who's, oh, she didn't really mean it. She's just saying that because she's older and wise now. She's being nice, but I'm mean. You've got to let her have the story too. Tell your story. But just tell the story. You don't have to make yourself better or worse in it. And then decide to forgive. Put down the anger, the pain, the resentment. Sometimes not necessarily because you or somebody else deserves it, as much as if you keep carrying it, it's going to continue to hurt you. And the decision to forgive is not made once and for all time. I'm pretty convinced that the decision to forgive is an ongoing one. Because the next time I wake up out of a start and I've had that dream again where I call her name really loudly in the playground at recess, I'm going to have to forgive myself again and remind myself, you already said you're sorry for that. You've been forgiven. It's okay. And then repair or release the relationship. When someone has wronged us very severely, sometimes you can't repair the relationship. Sometimes things are not okay even if we grant forgiveness. Right? But that repair or release lets us to forgive and say it's still not okay what happened. Because some things are just never going to be okay. Right? The abuse, the rape, the violence, the murder, some things are just not going to be okay. And when we forgive, we're not saying it's okay. We're saying I can now release that. It doesn't have to control me as much. Even though I know I'm going to have to revisit the forgiving part of it again and again. The 12-step program makes a big part of this. Can you forgive those? Can you seek forgiveness from those you have wronged? Can you seek the forgiveness from yourself too? Can you repair the hurt you've done to yourself? Can you be kind and compassionate and forgiving to yourself the way you would be to someone else if they came and genuinely asked your forgiveness? And I think that's the one most of us find hardest to do. And it will never be a perfect process. I will continue at times to put myself down and loathe myself for an afternoon I was mean in 3rd grade. But I sought her out. I asked forgiveness. I did good enough. I'll tell myself to put it down again and keep going on. I will not prop myself up for being such an awesome person to go seek forgiveness after all those years. I will just put it down and go on. I will get to middle ground. I will come in somewhere between putting myself down for it and thinking I'm so wonderful for having sought forgiveness. This morning, right before church, I read the New York Times and more stories about Donald Trump and his operatives possibly being in collusion with Russia and Russian agents. And again, I sink into the rageful disgust and bewilderment. And I catch myself. And remember, I cannot become the monster I seek to defeat. So I forgive myself. Again, it's an ongoing process. This work of repairing myself, my relationship to myself and the world around me, is an ongoing, lifelong project. And I have to tell myself, as part of that, finding humility, that I am good enough. And with compassion and humility, I move on.